The sky over the Valari capital was not blue anymore. It had turned into a burning canvas of smoke ash and a crimson hue that never faded. The great towers, once symbols of peace and knowledge, were now crumbling one by one as the Krell forces pushed further into the heart of the city. The Valari were a gentle race known across the stars, not for their armies, but for their wisdom. Their libraries held knowledge older than most civilizations, and their minds sought peace in a galaxy ruled by power. Yet none of their wisdom had prepared them for this nightmare. In the central sanctuary beneath the last standing temple, the surviving elders gathered, their voices trembling not from age, but from fear. The walls vibrated faintly with the distant roar of explosions, and the screams of their people echoed from the shattered streets. Above it was here that Elder Tarn placed his hand upon the altar, where an ancient beacon lay dormant for centuries, untouched and unspoken of. It had been created long ago during the age of first contact, but never used. Its purpose was simple yet terrifying: to send a signal across the galaxy calling for aid from any who might hear it. The Valari were a proud people, and they had always solved their problems with diplomacy. But now their sky was full of fire, and their future was vanishing with every breath they took. Elder Tarn looked at the others, who nodded slowly, their faces marked by sorrow and silent consent, and then he pressed down the stone. The beacon came to life, glowing with a deep golden light. It rose slowly from its cradle and sent a pulse through the stars. Not a message in language, but in emotion: desperation, fear, hope, a pure cry of a dying world, far beyond the Valari system, beyond the reach of Krell sensors, and beyond the territory of known empires. The signal traveled through the silence of space, across forgotten wormholes and ancient communication lines, drifting until it reached the system labeled Soul. It entered a cold listening post on the edge of human space, a facility run by machines, monitored by orbital AI, and forgotten by most of Earth's people, but not by Earth Command. The signal hit the array and activated dormant protocols that had not been used in decades. The eye identified the origin, the pattern, and the distress encoded within milliseconds. Later, the message was on its way to Earth in the massive headquarters of Earth Command, built inside the floating citadel of Atlas Station High. Above the Earth's surface, the alert reached the top brass of human defense. Commanders, generals, intelligence directors, and fleet admirals assembled in the Grand Hall. The screen at the center showed the signal glowing in red waves, spreading across. A map of the galaxy data streamed beside it, showing estimated threat levels, the known presence of Krell forces, and the distance between the Valari system and Earth. No one spoke at first. They watched and listened to the silent scream of a species they had never met. It was Admiral Leon, who finally stepped forward. She had fought in 3 galactic conflicts and survived the siege of Titan. Her voice was calm, yet carried the weight of history. She said, "We are not bound to respond, but we are not the kind to ignore this either." The room stirred quiet agreements, murmurs of duty, echoes of past wars and past victories. Humanity had changed over the last century. Once divided and small, Earth was now the heart of the united human systems, a federation of colony ships and advanced artificial minds. Their fleet was the strongest in known space, though they rarely used its full power. The High Council was summoned in less than an hour. Emergency protocol activated, classified channels lit up across Mars, Luna, and the orbital cities. The decision was swift and unanimous. They would go not with diplomacy, not with warnings, but with the full force of humanity's military might. They would remind the galaxy that while Earth slept, it was never weak, and while it watched from the shadows, it had never forgotten its strength. The order was signed, sealed, and sent to every fleet in space. Mobilize all forces. Operation Starfire was launched from the rings of Saturn to the deep hangars under Mars. Stations, ships began to rise. They came from colonies, mining platforms, orbital yards, and even deep space science stations. Some were old steel warships from past battles. Others were sleek new dreadnoughts powered by quantum cores. Some were piloted by humans, some by AI, but all bore the same symbol, the emblem of Earth, 12,000 warships lit up the void in a synchronized response across sectors. Lights blinked, engines flared, and stars trembled with the soundless thunder of mass acceleration. In the heart of Earth Command, a young officer named Ray stood watching the screen before him, showing fleet movement in real time. He had dreamed of flight as a child, imagined adventure in the stars. But this was something else. This was war, not of territory or pride, but of principle. Humanity did not know the Valari. They had no treaties or alliances, but that cry, the signal, that pulse of hope sent into the dark had reached them, and they could not ignore it across the galaxy. The Valari did not know yet. They could not see what was coming. They only saw the smoke rising, the skies breaking, the enemy pushing deeper into their last sanctuaries. But above them, high beyond their broken sky, beyond the orbit of their moons, space stirred. Soon, their night would blaze with light, and the stars would no longer be silent. The signal had been sent, the response was on its way, and the galaxy was about to witness what it meant when humanity answered a call for help, not with promises but with action, not with words but with fire. The Valari had long stopped hoping. They had sent the signal, not with belief but with desperation. Their cities were falling faster now. The once beautiful towers that reached for the skies were reduced to hollow bones. The streets were full of silence, broken only by the roar of Krell war machines and the distant wails of survivors hiding beneath the ruins. Every hour brought more fire, more destruction, and less hope. The invaders came without mercy, burning everything that stood in their way, and leaving nothing but ash behind. The Krell had no desire to conquer. They only consumed and moved on. In the deep mountains of the Valari's last stronghold, a young scout named Ellen moved through the caverns carrying messages between hiding groups. Her steps were light, her breath steady, but her heart heavy. She knew their time was running out. Food was low, shelters were crumbling, and every day, more of her people vanished. They had no weapons to fight, no strength to resist, just prayers sent into the dark and memories of a time when peace had meaning. The elders had told her about the signal, but she had not believed anyone would come. Not now, not for them. Far above their sky, beyond their moons, beyond even their sensors, the human fleet approached in silence. 12,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their surfaces gleaming with polished steel, their cores humming with energy. The void around them lit with slow pulses like the beating heart of something alive. Each ship carried weapons that had ended wars before they started. Each ship carried crews trained across generations from Earth, Luna, Mars, and beyond. They had left their homes, their families, their lives behind, because the order was given and the mission was clear. A cry for help had been heard, and they would answer. Commander Ray stood on the bridge of the flagship Horizon, a massive dreadnought, twice the size of old space stations, its armor layered with reactive plating, its cannons powered by plasma cores, and its wings lined with fighter bays. He looked out the glass wall before him, seeing not just stars, but history waiting to unfold. His officers moved around him, efficient, focused, and silent. They all knew this was not just another battle. This was something greater, a moment that would define how humanity would be remembered across the stars. Across other ships, messages flickered between captains, between AI minds, and between old friends who had fought in wars past. Admiral Leon gave her fleet-wide command: move into position, prepare for immediate contact. Priority 1 is protection of the Valari species. Priority 2 is elimination of Krell presence. She stood calm, but inside her mind raced with calculations, with memories of battles won and lives lost. She had never seen the Krell fight like this. Reports showed cities wiped in hours, populations vanished without trace. There was no negotiation, no warning, just pure unstoppable force. As the human fleet reached the edge of the Valari system, the sensor arrays picked up Krell ships in orbit, a cluster of destroyers circling the Valari's last planet, slowly turning their weapons downward, preparing for the final strike. The Krell had no idea what approached. They had faced resistance before, but never this, never the full force of Earth's wrath. The human ships activated stealth fields and spread across multiple vectors. The plan was simple: hit hard, hit fast, protect. the survivors and destroy the Krellin crouched behind a cracked wall in the ruined city. Her eyes scanning the sky, something felt different. The wind was still, the air too quiet. The usual vibrations of enemy machines had stopped. She looked up at the faded sun, and then she saw it, a shimmer like heat above the clouds. Then a flash, then another. She blinked, unsure. If it was her mind playing tricks, then the air itself seemed to pulse with light. The sky began to glow, not red, not orange, but pure white and blue, like stars being born right above her. The first wave of human ships broke through orbit, their engines leaving trails of light. The lead cruisers deployed, shielding fields over the remaining cities, creating barriers of energy. Between the Krell and the last Velari buildings, anti-orbital cannons lit up and destroyed Krell positions with pinpoint strikes. Fighters swarmed across the battlefield, moving in tight formations, cutting down enemy units with precision. Human dropships landed outside the mountain caves, deploying ground troops in armored suits who secured passageways and helped evacuate the wounded. The Velari were stunned. They had never seen machines move like this, never seen weapons this powerful or forces this organized. They watched in silence, some in fear, some in awe, as the skies changed color. The Krell responded with confusion. Their ships turned toward the new threat. Their codes scrambled as they tried to identify the attackers, but their systems returned nothing. Unknown species, unknown technology, unknown tactics. The Krell had never encountered humans, and now they did not know how to fight them. Commander Ray gave his second order: open all comms. Translate this message across all frequencies in every direction. Let them know we are here. The message was simple to all remaining. Velari, we heard your call. You are not alone. We fight for you now. Hold your ground. Help is here. And to the Krell, the message was shorter: leave now, or be erased across the galaxy. Listening stations picked up the broadcast, and civilizations far and wide heard the words and began to realize something had changed. The humans were no longer silent on the battlefield. Ellen saw the first human soldier step from a dropship, his armor shining, his steps firm, his eyes scanning the field. He reached toward her, not with a weapon, but with an open hand, and in that moment, she felt something she had not felt in weeks. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of something different. She reached out slowly and touched his hand, and in that small action, a bridge was formed between two worlds above them. The battle continued. Human ships moved like waves, washing away the Krell resistance with tactics born of old wars and firepower that split the sky. The Velari watched the storm unfold, and for the first time in many nights they looked upward, not with fear, but with hope. The stars were no longer empty. The sky was no longer silent, and the galaxy was beginning to remember the name of Earth. The air across the Velari plains was no longer thick with smoke. It was now electric, humming with power, and strange energy from above the sky shimmered with new colors as the human ships carved patterns of light across the atmosphere. Their presence could no longer be denied. They were everywhere. In the clouds in orbit, on the ground surrounding the last pockets of Velari life, not like conquerors, not like invaders, but like guardians, whose sudden arrival shifted the rhythm of an entire world. The Krell, who had once marched forward with confidence, now halted their formations, broken their movements, hesitant, their signals full of confusion. In the command center aboard the Horizon, Commander Ray stood at the observation deck, his eyes tracking the positions of the enemy forces. The holographic map in front of him lit up with red marks, slowly disappearing as human units neutralized threats with practiced precision. The ground forces had successfully established control over the southern sector and were now pushing toward the central ridge where the Krell had dug in for their final stand. Reports poured in showing successful evacuations of civilians from the underground caves, guided by both AI scouts and armored troops. The operation was moving faster than predicted, but Ray knew this was not the end. The Krell were still calculating. They were still waiting, and they were not done. In one of the medical bays, deep beneath a secure human field base, Ellen sat on the edge of a cot, her arm freshly wrapped, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had been pulled from the ruins just hours ago by soldiers. who moved like shadows and spoke through voice translators. They gave her water, wrapped her wounds, and treated her like an equal. She had expected Steel Voice's commands, cold procedures, but instead, there was calm, there was order and strange warmth from being so different from her own. She asked one of them why they came, why they crossed the stars for a species they never met, and the answer came without hesitation. Because someone asked for help and we could not ignore it. On the Eastern Front, the Krell began to regroup. Their ships retreated from orbit, forming a defensive ring around their central fortress, hidden beneath the dead cliffs of the polar range. Their commanders issued a rare broadcast addressed not to their own kind, but to the humans. It was cold, sharp, layered with synthetic tones. They asked who the humans were, what they wanted, why they interfered, and the response came from Admiral Leon, who had taken command of the Central Fleet. She spoke from the bridge of the Solstice, a command cruiser older than most worlds yet, still more powerful than anything the Krell had ever seen. She answered not with threats, but with promise. We are the children of Earth. We came because we heard a voice in the dark, and we do not let the dark take those who call to us. You will leave or be removed. The choice is yours. The Krell did not respond. They activated their fortress shield and prepared for war. Humanity responded the same way, not with hesitation, but with calculation. Every movement was part of a greater strategy. Every ship, every drone, every squad acted in coordination. Ground teams advanced using the terrain to their advantage, aided by Valari scouts who knew the mountain paths and hidden tunnels. Orbital strikes began softening the outer defenses, while stealth bombers moved under radar to disable power grids and supply chains. The Krell had numbers, but humanity had unity, precision, and something even more dangerous. They had purpose within. The War Council chamber of Atlas Station Earth Command watched in silence. Live feeds from drone satellites and helmet cams showed them the progress, but also the cost. Soldiers fell, machines broke, supply lines stretched thin. The Krell were fierce, their weapons ancient and designed for destruction. They adapted quickly and pushed back where they could, creating pressure points across multiple fronts. But Earth had prepared for this. Their strategies were forged in past wars, tested in simulations, and now refined in the fires of real conflict. Reinforcements were already en route. Newer fleets joining the battle every hour. Ellen walked through the temporary command post, set up near the old riverbank, watching the human officers move like pieces on a board. She saw their eyes alert, their hands steady, even under stress. She passed a large screen displaying ship positions and saw tiny dots move in coordinated patterns. Then she looked outside and saw those same ships above in the sky, forming a protective ring around the city's last standing tower, the place where her elders still prayed, still hoped. Even now, after everything, she felt something rising in her chest, something she had not allowed herself to feel in weeks. Belief in orbit. The second phase of the operation began. Human fleets split into quadrants, each targeting a specific sector of the Krell defense grid. They launched precision strikes at command nodes, communication relays, and drone factories. The Krell retaliated with focused firepower and suicide drones, attempting to disable human cruisers with swarms. But human AI countered with advanced jamming protocols and pulse waves that tore through digital signals, turning the Krell's own machines against them. Battles raged across the stars, like storms that knew no direction, only chaos and fury. But within that chaos, humanity moved like a tide, unified, unstoppable. One ship, stealth destroyer named Silence, breached the Krell fortress from beneath, using old mining tunnels mapped by Valari. Historians, the crew planted an explosive core at the base of the primary shield generator and escaped just before detonation. The resulting blast cracked the fortress shell and opened a path for the main ground force led by Commander Ray himself. They entered through smoke and fire, cutting through Krell lines with plasma rifles and EMP grenades, pushing toward the command node hidden deep within the mountain. Back in the valley, Admiral Leon prepared the final orbital maneuver, positioning 3 capital ships above the Krell stronghold, charging their primary Cannons for a focused strike. This was not to destroy, but to disable, to crack the last layer of protection and give Rey's team a chance to finish what they started. She gave the final signal, and the sky responded. The beams fired in perfect unison, tearing through the clouds, lighting the night like a second sun. Even the Valari, who had lost all sense of time, paused to witness it. Their faces turned upward, their eyes wide, their hearts silent. As the dust settled, the mountain fortress cracked open, revealing the broken interior of the Krell command core. Flickering lights, twisted steel, and silence, broken only by the sound of human boots on alien floors. They had reached the heart of the enemy, and now stood ready to end what had begun with a single call for help across the void inside. The shattered remains of the Krell fortress. The air was thick with smoke sparks burst from damaged conduits. The walls glowed faint red from emergency lights, and the sound of boots echoed through the corridors as Commander Rey and his unit moved forward, their weapons held steady, their eyes sharp. The deeper they went, the more twisted the structure became. The Krell had built their command core inside living rock, fused it with metal and energy. It pulsed like a wounded beast. Parts of the structure seemed to breathe, as if reacting to their presence. And yet the humans moved without pause, every corner checked, every signal traced. Their objective was close, and nothing would stop them outside the mountain. Storms had begun to gather. Strange weather patterns formed as a side effect of the massive energy discharges and gravitational shifts from the battle in orbit. Dark clouds rolled over the valley, winds roared across broken forests, and flashes of lightning revealed the silhouettes of distant warships still circling above. The battle had not ended. The Krell had begun a counteroffensive with terrifying force. A new fleet had arrived from deep space, larger, heavier, and older than anything seen before. Massive ships shaped like blades of black stone moved toward the planet's orbit, pushing back human lines and disrupting communication. The second wave had begun. Admiral Leon, aboard the Solstice, analyzed the incoming data. Her mind raced through possibilities. Every new reading showed greater risk. The Krell reinforcement fleet was equipped with ancient tech, gravity anchors, energy distortion fields, and adaptive shielding Earth forces had never faced such designs, and the challenge was growing with every passing second. But retreat was not an option. The mission was still active, and millions of Valari lives were still at risk. She issued new commands, splitting her fleet in half, one part to remain in orbit, defend the planet, and the other to engage the incoming enemy in deep space, draw them away, buy time, keep them from reinforcing their ground forces. The price would be high, but humanity had already chosen its path in the underground chambers of the fortress. Rey's unit reached the command node, a massive room filled with a strange mix of alien tech and organic matter. Cables twisted like roots around crystal cores. Pulsing with blue and red light in the center stood the Krell control interface, a floating sphere surrounded by rings spinning slowly, emitting a soft hum, the source of all field coordination. Enemy commands drone movement. It was alive in a way machinery should not be, and its presence pushed against the human mind. But Rey stepped forward, placed a disruption device at its base, and gave the signal to initiate shutdown. The moment the device activated, the sphere screamed, not with sound, but with thought, a pressure that cracked lights, shattered visors, and threw half the team to the ground. But they held the line, and within seconds, the node collapsed into silence. At the same moment, across the battlefield, Krell units froze, ships hesitated, drones stopped mid, confusion swept through their ranks. Without the node, their coordination faltered, their attack patterns broke. It was the opening humanity needed. The frontline forces surged forward. Valari guides led squads through narrow paths to outflank enemy positions. Air support resumed with new precision, and artillery rained down on Krell strongpoints. One after another, the enemy began to fall back. But it was not over, not yet. From deep space, the Krell flagship arrived. It moved like a shadow, consuming light. Its surface was layered with armor that bent energy. Its engines produced no heat, no sound, only a ripple through space, like a black tide coming closer. It dwarfed the human vessels around it and carried weapons No known scanner could fully read on the solstice alarms blared as Admiral. Leon watched its silhouette fill the tactical display. This was the center of the Krell's strength, the heart of their empire, and it was coming to end what had begun. Leon called all captains together, issued a single command: divert power to forward. Shields engage all long-range weapons, prepare for full assault. Operation Final Spark was authorized, an ancient Earth tactic used only in the direst of moments. Converge all fire on one point. Create a breach, board the enemy from within, and destroy. If from the heart, it had never been attempted on a ship this size. But now it was the only choice, because if the flagship reached the planet, there would be nothing left to protect. Fleets realigned, ships turned, and moved into formation, cannons charged. Beams of light arced through space toward the incoming Leviathan, and it responded with devastating power. Krell weapons tore through shielding, shattered 2 cruisers and disabled half a squadron in moments. Still, humanity did not break. Fighters darted between blasts, drones flooded its flanks, special units launched boarding pods aimed directly at weak points, mapped from intercepted data. Commander Ray, now aboard the strike vessel Valiant, led the boarding team with the same fire in his eyes that carried him through the mountain. He knew this was the moment. Everything before was only the path to this. The pods breached the Krell flagship hull, and inside began a battle of chaos. Dark corridors, filled with automated defense systems, biological traps, and disorienting gravity shifts. The interior of the ship was like a nightmare designed to confuse and consume. But Ray and his team moved with purpose, clearing room after room, pushing toward the core, while outside the human fleet poured every ounce of energy into breaking the armor, targeting exposed vents, engine exhausts, weak shield patterns. Every explosion inched them closer to success. On the ground, Ellen looked up from a makeshift field hospital where she helped treat the wounded. She saw the fire streak across the sky, not from the enemy, but from Earth's ships pushing forward into the void, and for a moment, she forgot the pain, the loss, the fear. She watched with thousands of others as the stars lit up with battle, and she whispered a silent prayer to whatever force had carried these beings across the stars to answer their call. Ray reached the core of the flagship. A spherical chamber pulsing with red light energy flowed in streams along the walls, powering every system, every weapon, every shield. They had one shot. His tech officer planted a fusion charge, set to overload the chamber's internal stabilizer. But they were not alone. The Krellcore Guardian emerged, tall, armored, flowing with dark matter. It struck with fury and desperation, but the humans held their ground, pushed forward, shielded Ray as he triggered the final sequence, and then they ran behind. Then the chamber exploded. The shockwave ripped through the flagship from within. Cracks spread through its spine, and flames burst from every vent. The beast that had once terrified the stars began to crumble. Its systems failed, its weapons fell silent, and its massive form drifted off course, until finally, with one last flare, it vanished into a silent bloom of fire and metal across the planet, across the fleet, across every Valari. Shelter. Silence fell first, then cheers, then tears. The sky no longer burned with fear, it burned with light, and in that moment, everyone knew the tide had turned. The Krell flagship was gone, torn apart from the inside. Its destruction echoed through every communication channel across space, a signal that the heart of their empire had stopped beating. The shock spread fast. Enemy formations across the planet began to collapse. Some drones shut down entirely. Others wandered aimlessly without orders or connection to the command core. Ground units that had marched forward without hesitation now broke apart, scattered and confused, their rhythm broken, their purpose lost, and the sky, which had once been filled with red and black, now pulsed only with the light of human vessels. Standing firm, watching over a world they had saved, Commander Ray and his remaining strike team were pulled from the edge of destruction. Their pods shot out of the debris seconds before the final implosion behind them. Fragments of the Krell ship drifted into the stars, glowing like ashes on the wind. Recovery ships moved swiftly, dragging them aboard, where medical officers rushed to treat wounds and patch suits. The crew of the Valiant cheered, not loud, not wild, but with quiet, powerful relief. They had done what was thought impossible. They had reached the enemy's core. They had shattered it, and now the weight of the entire mission began to lift from their shoulders. On the surface of the Valari world, dawn broke for the first time in weeks. Not a dawn filled with fire and smoke, but with soft light spreading over the shattered ruins of their city. Survivors stepped out of shelters from beneath fallen towers and collapsed temples, blinking at the calm sky above the strange human ships still hovered silently, protective walls of steel and light. Some carried out supply drops, others scanned the land for remaining danger, but none attacked, none conquered. They had come not to claim but to shield, to rebuild, and every Valari who looked up now understood that this was not a force of domination, but of guardianship. Ellen stood among a group of her people near the remains of the central plaza. What had once been the heart of their culture was now a field of broken stones and burnt trees. Yet in the center stood something new. Human engineers had begun placing a beacon, a device that would serve as a permanent relay between Earth and the Valari. It would bring communication, access, protection, and peace. And beside it stood a single soldier, his helmet removed, his face open to the world, his gaze soft as he looked over the people. He had helped save. Ellen stepped forward, not with fear, but with something else, gratitude. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed, not as a servant, but as a sister in shared survival, and he returned the gesture with quiet respect. Far above in orbit, Admiral Leon stood on the command deck of the Solstice, her uniform worn, her eyes tired, but her stance still strong around her. The bridge crew moved with purpose. Final scans completed. Enemy remains tracked. Atmospheric filters activated across multiple cities. Supply routes opened between ships and surface teams. Reports confirmed that Krill forces had fully withdrawn from the region. Some signals showed smaller enemy clusters fleeing into uncharted space, but they were no longer organized. No longer a threat, and the Valari homeworld was safe. Messages poured in from across the galaxy. News of the battle had reached distant colonies, trade networks, and listening posts. Species who had watched humanity from afar now saw them differently. Not as isolated beings on a blue planet, but as protectors who had crossed the stars to defend life. They did not know governments that had once ignored Earth now requested alliances. Channels that had long been silent lit up with greetings, with thanks, with invitations, and humanity stood ready, not for war, but for peace. Made stronger through unity, made wiser through fire. Commander Ray returned to the horizon, where he was greeted with respect, not fanfare. No medals, no speeches, only nods from fellow officers and quiet words of recognition. His mission was complete, his team was safe, and the stars were calm again. He stood by the large viewing deck alone for a moment, watching the Valari world below. Lights returning to cities, people rebuilding, children walking freely once more. And in that vision, he saw the true victory. Not in the destruction of a ship, not in the fall of an empire, but in the return of peace to a world that had almost lost it forever. On the Valari plains near the northern hills, a structure began to rise, designed by both human engineers and Valari architects. It was not tall nor grand, but it carried weight, built of stone from the ruins and steel from fallen ships. It stood as a memory, a symbol, and at its base an inscription carved in both languages. It read, to those who lit up the stars when darkness came, to those who answered not with words, but with action, to those who reminded the galaxy that hope is never alone. It was a place of reflection, a place where no weapons would be carried, only memory, only peace. As time passed, the world healed, the forests began to return life, sprouted through cracks in the stone. Rivers, once tainted, now ran clear, and the sky remained calm. The Valari rebuilt slowly, carefully, with help from human advisors who never imposed, only guided, who listened as much as they spoke, and the two species grew close, not in politics or power, but in understanding and trust, formed on a battlefield, but made real in quiet cooperation, and shared dreams of a future where no cry for help would ever again go unheard. The human fleet slowly departed, leaving behind support stations, medical units, communication hubs, but no walls, no Chains, their ships vanished into the stars like falling embers, carried by purpose and memory, and as they left, the Valari gathered across mountaintops and city roofs to watch them go, standing together in silence, eyes filled with something stronger than tears. And as the last ship disappeared beyond the horizon, a single voice spoke, not loud, not forced, but strong enough to carry May. The stars remember them always, and others repeated the words slowly together, and the wind carried it across the land. In the chambers of Earth Command back on Atlas Station, leaders watched the final transmissions. Their screens showed quiet cities, glowing lights, and faces no longer haunted. They exchanged no long speeches, no announcements, only silent nods. Among those who understood the weight of what had been done and what must come next, for this was not the end. This was a beginning, not just for Earth, not just for the Valari, but for the galaxy. A message had been sent long ago, and a reply had come with strength and fire, but it had ended in light, and in that light something new had been born. And so the story was written not on paper, but in the stars, in the hearts of two worlds, and in the legacy of those who chose to rise when they could have turned away, who brought 12,000 ships across space, not for conquest, not for pride, but for a promise that no voice would go unanswered, and no cry for help would echo in silence ever again. The galaxy remembered, and it always would. End.